DaVinci Resolve 18.5 has some amazing features, but I know some people that want to just kind of delve into the program and learn what each page is, some of the helpful tools, and some of the helpful project settings. So that's what this video is, and I hope you enjoy. Let's see how to actually get DaVinci Resolve. And if you go over to blackmagicdesign.com, products, DaVinci Resolve, you will come to the DaVinci Resolve page. Our current rendition is DaVinci Resolve 18. And if you scroll down, you will see that there is a free download, which has some limitations to it, but it's still a great program if you're operating at 1080p. And then there is the Resolve Studio version, which is $295. But what's nice about the Studio version, it's a one-time payment. You own the product, and it's not a subscription-based service. It's a one-time buy, and then you can continue to update on that Studio version. You just want to make sure that you keep your license key. When you launch the application, you're going to get this page right here. And this is where all your projects are that you've created through the system and how to access them. Now, if you want to create a new project, you simply go down to New Project, and then you can start from scratch. But since I currently have some projects already open here, I'm going to go ahead and click on one of those. I'm going to click on the green, which is just some test footage, really. I double-clicked on that, and that's going to bring me up to my page here. Now, I'm going to start on the page furthest to the left here so you can see what each one does. You see there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different tabs. And then you have your home page and your project settings over here in the corner. Now, the home page will take you to the screen that we just came from, which is the project manager, which has all your projects. And so if you want to switch from one project to another, and then the settings page brings up your project settings. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the settings before I go to any of these other tabs, because setting up your main project settings is going to make your experience worthwhile and easier to get all that taken care of in advance, because your hard drive can fill up with footage and data very, very quickly if you're not sending it to the right places that you want it to go. So under your master settings, you have the timeline resolution, and that's going to be whatever the project resolution is that you're bringing in. So if you're bringing in 4K files, then you would do 3840 by 2160 Ultra HD. And then if you had 1080p files, then you would do 1920 by 1080, and so on and so forth. You can see there's a lot of different variations there. But my footage here is 4K RAW, so I want to make sure that I'm bringing it in for the timeline resolution at what my resolution is of my footage. If you are working in vertical, you can click the little vertical tab there, and it's going to switch those around. So let's say, for example, you're doing social media posts, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts, Facebook Reels, and you're recording vertically, then you can click that, and it'll allow you to edit and process your footage in that way. So you don't have to kind of flip it around on the post side. You can get it right in your project settings. This is what your frames per second are. If you're looking in your camera and you're recording, that would be the FPS. 24.976 is oftentimes considered 24 frames per second. They just shave off the decimal points there to save on data rate, but that's exactly what I'm filming at on my camera, so I make sure that that frame rate is the same, and I want it to play back at that same frame rate as well. So I have those two matched so that it plays back at what it was filmed at, so that I'm getting an accurate representation of my footage. Then over here, we have video format. Now this right here is going to be for your monitoring purposes. Now, when you're monitoring your footage, you don't need to necessarily watch everything back in 4K as you're processing and watching your footage, because you have a much smaller screen. As you saw, actually, I'm going to close this out. As you see here, I'm going to go to my editing page. We have a very small screen here, and you don't need 4K resolution for such a small screen unless you're working on, say, a separate monitor and you have a full screen open, then 4K would come in handy. But for such a small area here, I don't need 4K resolution playing. I can do 1080p or even smaller. In fact, I work with proxies, and I'll explain what those are in a minute here. All right, so for the video monitoring, I'm just going to go at default at 1080p at the frame rate that I have. And then I don't have anything running through SDI, so that doesn't really affect me. Video bit depth is defaulted here at 10-bit and 8-bit. The footage that I'm actually bringing in is 12-bit RAW. So it doesn't give me the option here because there is a RAW tab in DaVinci Resolve. And we'll get to that once we get to the color settings. But there's 8-bit and 10-bit. Since 10-bit is closer to my 12-bit color, for color grading, I'm going to just go to 10-bit. And then this should be defaulted to bilinear. And then if I go down to optimize media and render cache, this is very, very important for playback purposes. you will find that if you're trying to play back a high resolution footage in 4K, you might have some significant lag and making it very difficult to play back and actually complete your project, or even just to edit, make it very difficult to find each frame, watch it back in real time. So this is where proxies come in really, really handy. Now you have proxy media resolution, proxy media format, optimized media resolution, optimized media format, render cache format. All right, so that might seem all very intimidating and confusing, but essentially what it is proxies are lower resolution files of the main footage. So it creates a duplicate of your clips at a much lower rate, or a data rate, and much lower resolution. And so as you saw before on the screen, you have a very small area of actually viewing your footage for editing in Davinci Resolve. So you don't need a significant amount of resolution. So I'm processing, I'm gonna go back up here at 1080p, and then creating a duplicate of that footage and making it even lower resolution. So I'm gonna do quarter resolution, because that screen, I'm gonna get out of here. This right here is about probably more of like a, I don't know, maybe an eighth of the size of my screen. It's not a very big monitor here. So for what I'm doing here, since I have a much smaller area, I'm in my project settings going to go ahead and make that a quarter resolution for my low res files. Optimized media are essentially transcoded media. It makes it run better on Davinci Resolve. So you can create proxies or optimized media. I tend to work with proxies rather than optimized media, because optimized media has a lot bigger file sizes, which bog down my hard drive and my computer. But I did want to make sure that those were also optimized as well. So sorry, my kid's talking in the background. Proxy media, doing in quarter. The proxy media format, I'm going to go ahead and choose DNX HRHQX. It's a high resolution, easily editable format for nonlinear editing systems, everything from Adobe to Davinci to Avid as well. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that. It works pretty well in my system here. And then for optimized media resolution, I'm going to let it choose automatically what it's going to choose, because it tends to do a good job at that. And then uncompressed 10-bit, I'm choosing uncompressed 10-bit so that way I can color grade things more easily and retain that color information. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and scroll down here. This right here is probably the most important thing to set up in regards to making sure your hard drive doesn't fill up with a bunch of data and slow everything down and require you to hunt down your footage. So proxy generation location. You can see that I have an F drive here. That F drive is just an external hard drive. It might be a different letter of the alphabet for you. It might be a K, it might be, D, just depends on how your system's set up. But I have all my proxy stuff directed towards a specific folder that I created on my external hard drive, so that way I know where all my file information is going and it doesn't bog down my main system. So that way when I unplug my hard drive, my computer is not constantly trying to process all this folder information. It can safely be stored externally from my computer. And so what I would recommend doing is on an external hard drive, or if you have a really large hard drive space, create a folder, go to Browse, find that folder and select that folder so that all your proxies go to that folder. Do the similar thing with your cache and also any stills as well. So that way everything is going to whatever folder or hard drive that you want it to go to, and not allowing the system to just choose a location for these files, because as things start to fill up, it can very easily slow down your computer and fill up your hard drive and make things hard to run. You want to know where everything's going. So again, create a folder, go to Browse, and send all that stuff to it. Now that you have set up your project settings, I'm sure you're probably like, wow, that was a lot. I didn't need to know all that. Well, you can really just get started editing on your system, but if you don't get that stuff taken care of ahead of time, it's going to make your life a headache later on. And so you want to knock all that project setting out stuff first, so that way you can, once you start editing, you're not having to stop your creative process to go fix things or remove files and have things disconnected or refind them. And just getting all that out of the way is going to make your life a lot easier. But now that we've done that, we can go ahead and go over the pages. So I'm going to go ahead and just show you which each one is first. We're going to start on the media management page. And this media management page is where you're going to get all your clips from your SD cards or CFast cards or whatever, wherever your footage is. It could be on a hard drive that you're pulling off as well. But this is where you get all of it. You can see over here in the corner, I have my hard drives listed here, and then I'm able to find where my footage is and then drag and drop it down over here into the master media bin, which I've already done. So I would have clicked on that, found the footage, and then left click, dragged it over and dropped it in here. And then your footage is now in the master bin for DaVinci Resolve for editing purposes. You might be looking at this and be like, what are these little lines right here on the footage? Well, since I've already dragged and dropped footage into here, I've already done in and out points on those footage for editing purposes. So that's why they might look a little bit different with those lines on the side there. But that's not anything regarding this page. That's as far as my editing workflow. And I'll show you how to do that in a few minutes. So we'll go back to each one of these pages and kind of give a step-by-step outlook of it. But that's what this page does. So now this next one is the first of the editing pages. There's two editing pages. There's the cut page and the edit page. Each one has its benefits. Most editors that I know tend to live over in the edit page and rarely ever use, if ever use, the cut page. But that's not to say that the cut page doesn't have its purpose. In fact, there's some really, really fast export options here and fast zoom options, close-ups, and expedited workflow stuff that you can use in the cut page that makes things a lot easier and faster to work with than in the edit page. So the cut page has its place, and we'll go over that, but I tend to kind of work mostly in the edit page. So we're going to go ahead and go over to that one next. All right, the edit page, if you've worked in any nonlinear editing system, this is what's probably going to look most familiar to you. You might be a little confused by all the little corner panels here, but that's just simply your flyout menus for customization. If I was to close those down or make those smaller, we would have our bin selection right here for where our folder, all our files are. And then we have our timeline down here with your video tracks, your audio tracks, and of course your tools at the top. And now these tools over here look similar to, say, Adobe and Avid, but some of them have a little bit different features as well, or might look slightly different. All right, and then we're going to go look at the Fusion page. Fusion is essentially the Adobe After Effects of DaVinci Resolve. This is where you can create everything from titles to lower thirds. There are some default titles in the edit page that you can just drag and drop and just forget about and you're done with. But if you want to do anything custom motion graphics work and custom effects, this is where you're going to build that. Instead of it being a layer method, such as a lot of you might be familiar with in either Avid or in Adobe, it's all node based. So there is a lower thirds that I was working on down over here. I'm going to go ahead and bring that up so you can see what a node structure looks like. All right, so you can see that the node structure here is much, much different than, say, a layer-based system, and it might look very intimidating, but essentially what it is directions. You're telling one thing to do one thing, and within that, all this other stuff happens within that if you're thinking layers, within that layer. And then after all that stuff is done within that layer, you now have your next step, and then finally the media is exported out, and you have your final product. And so that's what this is. It's instructions. And if you don't know how to operate that, that's fine. There are plenty of tutorials on how to do that, because I also have to watch those tutorials. I'm not going to pretend that I'm good at motion graphics. But this is what a node structure looks like compared to your layer structure that you would find in After Effects or Avid. It's just simply instructions of telling the system what to do, and you link it up with little lines. When you grab stuff, you link stuff up with little lines. Okay. All right. So the color tab. The color tab over here is where you are going to do your color grading or color correction, if you want to call it that. Now, there are multiple flyout areas, including things like nodes, and you can also bring up your timeline if you want. You can see that the timeline is listed here. I just have some files dropped in so it doesn't look like a normal timeline, because this is kind of an experiment project here. Now in here, on the color tab, you have everything from raw camera access to where you can control color, temperature, tint, exposure if you're working with raw files. It's not linked up to this project because these files right here are not raw files. These are XFAVC. I said at the beginning of the video they were raw files, but I forgot this was before my camera was updated and allowed for raw files. I've been working since raw files since, but these were XFAVC, so that's why this is grayed out and I don't have access to it. But if I did have access to it, I could control everything from the color temperature to the tint to the exposure, sharpness, highlights, and so on and so forth. But I can still manipulate that stuff in the color wheels tab. So we have lift, gamma, and gain, just like what you would have in any nonlinear editor. And then if you go to the HDR section, or if you're working with log footage, which I was working with log footage on this, I have a little log tab over here where I can control shadows, midtones, highlights, and offsets. You also have HDR, so we can get a little bit more specific if you're working with HDR footage, including global. So if you want to adjust the exposure and saturation overall, you can do so with your tabs down here or on the little wheel as well. We have motion effects. We have your curve systems, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and color warper, qualifiers, masks, and so on. And the node-based structure, I'll get into how that works in another video, but that's where you're going to do your color grading here. Fairlight is your audio page. In your audio page, you have everything that you would have in any audio page, except for where you find it is where everything is going to get a little bit weird. So now you have over here your ability to record directly within Davinci Resolve here, or within Fairlight. You have the ability to solo tracks, mute tracks over here on the side. And then over here is where you can apply your effects. So you have a little effects on the audio tracks here to where you can apply your effects, everything from your typical channel processing, delay, distortion, dynamics, instrument work, metering, modulation, pitch, restoration. So if you need to reduce noise, reduce hum, reduce the amount of S's in there, and then also adjust reverb as well. You also have your dynamics page here, and you also have, your ability to adjust dynamics and EQ. And then there are some really cool functions within dialogue processor, which allows you to do voice isolation, which is pretty cool. And then over here, you have your export page. This is where you want to export your footage. There is a fast export in the cut page, but that is for fast exporting and less customization. If you want to customize exactly to what you want, you need to come over here. You have custom export. You have .h.264, H.264 hyperdeck, H.265, YouTube at 1080p, Vimeo, Twitter, TikTok, certain ones for presentations. If you need to go to send it to Dropbox, Replay, IMF, Final Cut Pro 7, Premiere XML. Let's say you bring in your footage from your timeline from Adobe, which is where you've done all your editing, and you just want to color grade in Davinci Resolve, but you need to send it back over there. That's what you would do this right here, is be able to send it back to Premiere XML. Avid, to be able to send it to Avid, and as well as Pro Tools. Davinci Resolve is, even if you don't do your editing in here, it's great for color correction work. In fact, Davinci Resolve has been known as the industry standard for color correction on the post-production end. That's why you have all these abilities to import files from other non-linear editors and to send it back over to it if you're doing color correction within the system. Or audio. You can do audio as well. Now, down over here, you have different tabs. You have video, audio, and files. Okay, so for video over here, this is where you're going to send out figure out your format, your codec, your encoder type, resolution, frame rate, quality, coding profiles, rate control, presets, tuning, and so on. And so for those of you who are interested in sending stuff out to YouTube, I have gone through my fair share of tutorials as well. And the one I've kind of narrowed in on has been H.265, although it doesn't play back on PC. On the computer system, it does, however, process very nicely on YouTube. So if I was going to do that, I'd go to custom export. I could go down to, I keep it on QuickTime, go to H.265. My resolution, it would be, I always go out through 4K, which is Ultra HD. Oop, I don't want to use vertical because this is not a vertical video. You can see that these are the same project settings that I had set up in my master settings. So I want to keep all that the same. But when I go to send it out, I want to change variable bitrate to constant bitrate, so that way it's staying at the same bitrate throughout the beginning of the video all the way to the end and not changing in between. It'll play back better, it'll keep a better visual look to it. All right, quality. Right here, the general rule is you want to take your frames per second on quality and then double it and add 3 zeros behind it. So since I have 23.976, essentially that's 24 frames per second, I'm gonna just round it up to 25 frames per second, double that to 50, and put 3 zeros behind it. So for this bit rate here, I'm going to change my bit rate. I'm gonna change this to 50,000 kilobits per second. And that'll give me the bit rate that I want it to be at. All right, so restricted 50,000 kilobits per second. Again, I'm taking this is close to 25, doubling that, putting 3 zeros behind it, and that's gonna give me good quality on export for YouTube. I'm gonna go to add to render queue. After you select add to render queue, it's gonna have you select where you want your full file to go to. It'll drop it in the jobs queue, and then you select render all, and then your project will start to export to whatever file you sent it to. If there's any particular tool or page that you want me to do more of a deep dive on, tell me which one it is in the comment section below, and I'll make some more videos for the audience. And if you are part of my audience, like and subscribe to help out this channel, and I look forward to seeing you in more videos. Yeah.